Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all of you to our third and final session of Friends of Europe's Security Summit. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. We've covered a number of issues about how do we kind of deal with resetting new global relationships in the context of peace, security, and defense. What are the cyber security implications of the future in the context we find ourselves in? And we had a Nobel Prize winner to boot who gave us a very, very effective reminder of what were the lessons we should learn from history and for Europe to tackle killer robots and not to let them loose, amongst other things. We had a really interesting set of discussions in the past 2 days. But if you missed yesterday, we have a short vignette to give you a recap. And just before that, just say, my name is Dharmendra Kanani. I'll be moderating this final session that's been kicked off from Monday onwards by our senior fellow, Jamie Shea. So you can come back to me in a moment, but I'm going to show you for a minute or so what you missed yesterday.
Guidelines and regulations will not make killer robots able to follow the laws of war, nor will they result in ethical killing machines. Guidelines and regulations will not stop the spoofing and hacking of killer robots, the results of which no one can predict. The EU should not put time, energy, expertise, and money into working on principles or guidelines on how best to use killer robots. That's insane. It should work to stop them.
If you want proper defense, cyber defense, you need to invest. You need to invest in human resources. You need to invest in cyber security technology. You need to invest in joint training and exercises. You need to invest in international relations so that when an attack appears, everything is ready.
We come forward with a package on cybersecurity on the 15th of December, and the revision of this cybersecurity law will be part of it. But it will come together with the revision of the law about the critical infrastructure altogether, because it is impossible to divide security systems, information systems, and physical security anymore.
We are not going to be able to meet any of these challenges going forward, and in terms of deciding some of these important pathways to protecting ourselves and defending ourselves as we as a society co-evolve with our dependence on cybersecurity. So the way that I believe that the cyber workforce shortage can be addressed is not in requiring additional certifications and all of these types of bars. It's frankly in creating pathways for cross-training across all industries.
One thing that we shouldn't forget is that technology is actor agnostic. It is a very democratic in that sense. There is no such thing as principally exclusive uses of digital technology. Exploits, vulnerabilities will never remain exclusive for long. And the only advantage would be one of technological superiority for them. But I would argue that the West and Europe in particular cannot lay claim to that either.
There you have it, a quick recap of some of the thoughts from yesterday in terms of key issues that we need to be thinking about. Today, as I said in this final session of our Security Summit, we're turning our attention to space. What does it mean for us? It's an area that for long we have treated as something that's actually over there, it's geeky, it's techy, it's not going to be developed for many, many years, but suddenly, actually, we have nearly 50, I think it's 58 countries with a space capacity and assets currently in the world. We are moving at a pace where the private sector is doing its own thing also in terms of being able to launch satellites on behalf of others and producing them cheaper, faster, and better, in fact. What we do know is that currently in space, and this is fascinating, there's more junk in space than there are operational satellites. And we also know that space will very quickly, if not already, has become a geopolitical security, defense and peace matter that we need to urgently address our attention to and focus our minds on in terms of what's happened on Earth that we should not repeat on the planet, in the space, if you like. And we need to think long and hard about that, because what we're witnessing in terms of east-west type of dimensions are being replicated in space. If we don't think about space in a more enlightened, intelligent, and I hope for good resource for the whole planet and humanity, rather than actually just repeating and reflecting our current tensions on the Earth that we know as it is at the moment. So for this discussion, we have a number of key contributors. We have a minister from Spain who is actually an astronaut, who's the first person in Spain who's been into space, but a minister of state for science and innovation. We have a planetary scientist for you. We also have a space engineer and someone who's involved in space policy, but all from a very senior perspective in different parts of Europe, but will actually contribute to this conversation. Before I invite them in, I'd like to just remind you of the rules of the game. What we have is a Zoom audience and a live stream audience. For those of you on Zoom, you should know, keep your screen on, keep it muted, and use your virtual hand. Make sure your name's on your screen too, it'll be helpful. But keep yourself muted. But if you wish to raise a question, a query, or just air your frustration, please don't hesitate to use the virtual hand. If you don't know where that is, go to your screen, the icon participants, click on that and you'll find the icon for the virtual hand. Use that. It's the only way I'll know to bring you in. But I also encourage you to use the chat function. So the Zoom chat function is great. So if in the short time that I have, if I can't get to you, or if there's a question that's been asked or an issue that you can respond to, or there are resources you're aware of, put it on the Zoom chat so that this becomes a community of engagement around this matter. This is not a classic conference. We at Friends of Europe don't do that. It's very much about the brain around us that we engage with in problem solving, how we improve our response to space from a peace, security, defense policy point of view. Also welcome to our live stream audience. Very good to see you too. Don't feel disincluded. You are included. What we'd like you to do is raise your question, very much like those on Zoom, but do use hashtag Security Summit to log your question, query, or frustration. And I'll try and see if I can take you, as many of you as I can in this time, because we would like to make this as interactive as possible. So that's the grill, if you like, in terms of engagement. And what I'd like to do first is invite Minister Pedro Duque to say a few words about, from his perspective, and welcome, Minister. Good to see you and have you with us.
Nice to see you too.
Hello. So, Minister, if you can say to us, from your perspective, are member states cooperating on this agenda? And if you can, to be as frank as you can, in terms of there might be challenges there which you might want to address, but are they cooperating as you might wish them to?
Yes, certainly that Europe has had a very long tradition of developing space infrastructure. We have been working at it for about 50 years, and we have an organization, the European Space Agency, which many member states contribute and promotes that the industries make very high quality developments in space matters. Obviously, having developed lots of space assets makes Europe an important region for actually being concerned about what happens in space and whether our space assets are being cared for. And obviously, in particular, Europe has a Galileo navigation system in place, Earth observation system of the highest class that both are operational services that we need to continue, and therefore we are quite aware of the fact that space in itself is becoming more crowded, and therefore we need to get ready to to at least mitigate the risks, and we are doing we are taking some steps in that direction. We have increased our investments in space awareness systems in order to at least assess the possible trouble. Certainly, as you mentioned, and as is the subject of your question, it is more difficult to take decisions that pertain security in Europe as it is in unified countries that have a central government. ESA is a very technical organization in which decisions are taken in many cases because of technical reasons, and we all agree to give ESA engineers the authority to take many decisions, but certainly decision-making process in ESA when it comes to strategic decisions can be quite cumbersome. Sometimes becomes untransparent. There's the interchange of the interests of the different countries. You think it's going to be one way, then it changes format. The processes can be very long, even though we go along. Yeah. And as you can imagine, in defense, it could be even more difficult. But we are hoping that in the next periods that the European Union will help the cooperation between the member states.
So in short, what you're saying is that what we experience in other EU-wide bodies, we have the same tussle and politics that we see in ESA in terms of decision making and the bureaucracy. But ESA is not a regulation body, and it occurs to me that the treaties that have any relationship with this agenda in terms of the Outer Space Treaty or what they call the Liability Treaty of 72 are completely out of date to deal with the circumstances we find ourselves in at the moment. And when you think about the fact that China's on a race to put as many out there as possible, as I hear from news in this past weekend alone, in terms of their investment, we know the US are heavily investing, and in their especially in the Import-Export Index, there's been nearly 2 billion investment requests for entrepreneurship investment in space alone. So they've seen a marked development in this particular territory. So there's more money going in from the private sector and being sought, and you've got everyone sort of doing their own thing. What about Europe actually then? Europe's role as a rule setter and a standard bearer. What conversations are happening at EU-wide level that you and fellow ministers are providing reassurance to the ordinary citizen that actually you're on top of this?
At the moment, the regulation obviously has to be a world regulation, so we can and we will make our effort to play the central role that Europe has always had in trying to bring together the whole world in certain issues. We have the leading role in dealing with climate troubles and climate change, and we expect that we will be able to do this also in the tackling of the possible problems of, let's say, overcrowding of space and so on. It is true that the treaties are too generic for the current circumstances. I think everyone understands that as a truth, and we need to think about what will we do in the next years to come to address this problem of the unregulation that could become really a problem for the people exploiting space.
Sure, I take the point that it has to be global, but clearly there's a role here for the EU to set a pathway and be a leader in creating the kind of framework it has in other matters which other countries have followed with interest and actually helped rule setting elsewhere. But clearly it's something that's an open question that we need to follow up. And I know, Minister, you need to leave very shortly, which is a pity, because I know there'll be lots of questions about, what are our ministers in this space doing in Europe to safeguard both the citizens, but also to make sure we, as we heard the eerie message from the Nobel Prize winner about, you know, robot killers and all other types of potential for military use, weaponry, rather than communications-based satellites, simply. Briefly before you go, say a few words about what your concerns, if any, or what you think should be done in relation to private sector involvement in space.
It has always, I always say or repeat the words of some wise people that have said that in the past, that private sector has always been the one manufacturing everything that we send to space. There's no changing that. There was a change with the appearance of the Space Act in the United States, in which private sector was involved with service contracts. That was what triggered the next generation of companies that worked in the space sector, and now this has been increased by the developments in technology that make spacecraft more affordable, or the provision of maybe hundreds or even thousands of spacecraft even possible. I think that we need to stick to what we have known in the past to work. That is, every time some technology has been developed, most of the time by the innovative public sector, and it has become part of the market, then this public sector has to engage, as you have said before, in regulation, so that the exploitation is reasonable. So
Okay. Yeah.
we are lacking, certainly, this kind of regulation, and hopefully we'll get there soon. But it is something that we need to think about, certainly.
Sure, thank you. I know you need to go, but thank you for being with us. But I have to say, given our experiences with big tech players, whether that's Google, Facebook, and others, we've learned that public policy, to its failure and its cost to the public, have caught up too late in governing what these big tech giants do. I don't think we've got the time for that to happen and say, let's wait and think about this. It feels like there's a sense of urgency, and that our politicians really need to be thinking about, actually, what are the lessons we've learned from what's happened so far. But hopefully, I know you need to go, and if you have any thoughts on that, please don't hesitate to ask your advisors or others to put it on the Zoom chat. We'd be keen to know what is being planned at the EU level to make sure that we have the right regulatory and rule-based system in place from its perspective as we move into the future. But thank you for joining us. I know you need to leave now. And if those of you have questions, please, to the Minister, put it on the Zoom chat, and I'm sure he will join, ensuring that he responds to your questions. I'm now going to, again, I want to remind you all, use your virtual hand to raise questions. This is don't be such passive observers in the debate. We've got a lot of interesting people here on Zoom and in the live stream, I can imagine, but we know about for the cross-sector people that we've got on Zoom, do contribute and see what, tell us what you think about some of the questions that I've been posing to the politician. I want to now turn to a planetary scientist. Tanya, thank you and very warm welcome to you. Good to have you with us. No, it's great to have you. Tanya, I'm going to say this as straight as possible. What are the upsides and downsides of Earth observation?
I mean, there are a ton of upsides. We use Earth observation data every single day for things like the weather report that you might watch on the news in the mornings. You're using EO data anytime you use the GPS in your phone to navigate somewhere. And we use it for a lot of longer term things like studying the impacts of climate change, looking at changes in urbanization, using it for security things like monitoring the movements of good and bad actors around the world and monitoring humanitarian crises. So there's tons of different ways that this data impacts our lives and humanity as a whole. The downsides, the one that people tend to raise, at least in general public, is privacy. Mm-hmm. You're being watched from space constantly, but the flip side there is the satellites that we have, at least like the company that I work for, Planet Labs, they're not high enough resolution to see you individually or even like identify your car from space. It's not like James Bond where we can zoom in and see your license plates. Governments might have.
But Tanya, others can do that though, can't they?
I mean,
just because you can't doesn't mean others are not.
There are governments that have very high resolution
Precisely.
satellites where you could start doing things like that.
Yeah.
The commercial sector does not. We are actually, there are regulations in place that limit the resolution of commercial satellites, for example.
Okay. And go on, carry on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, go ahead.
You made reference, I mean, you said that there are a number of upsides, in terms of beneficial to the ordinary citizen if they had access to the same data, obviously. If they knew about it, it would be a good starting point. From a downside point of view, what's your sense of the bad actor syndrome? Just from what because here you are, you've someone who've kind of done some amazing things and offer this opportunity from a perspective of enterprise and being entrepreneurial in your own right. So others can do what you've done. But, you're a good guy. You're a good person, if I can say that, non-sexist way. I meant that. You're a good person. What about the bad actor syndrome, and what do we do?
There's definitely a couple of issues there, I guess. One is the bad actor syndrome in terms of people that could be using Earth observation data, and then one is bad actor syndrome in Earth orbit, when you have the ability now for companies to launch these massive amounts of satellites. Mm-hmm. As the minister was alluding to before, even a decade ago, really governments were controlling a lot of this. Companies were developing technology, but a lot of that innovation and drive was coming from the government. They would put out a call saying, we want to build a satellite to do X, Y, Z, and the industry would respond. Now, industry can build, launch, and operate their own mega constellations of satellites without much government involvement at all, other than maybe a little bit of funding and maybe some regulations in terms of, when and where you're allowed to launch from. And the regulations are definitely not moving quickly enough to deal with the number of satellites that are in the pipeline and that are being launched every day. A good example is late last year, there was a near collision between one of the European Space Agency satellites and a SpaceX Starlink satellite. And the probability here was like 1 in 1,000, which might not sound like a lot, but in space, that's a very high probability. Yes. But neither side really wanted to have to be the one to move their satellite to not collide with the other one. And there aren't any regulations in place that say, well, whoever was here first in this orbit is the one that gets to sit there. It ended up being that ESA moved their satellite because SpaceX, they didn't get in touch with them. They weren't responding to actually move their own satellite. But this is going to come up more and more as we get more satellites. In terms of Earth observation data on the ground, though, there are some ways that you can try to avoid this. There are like blacklists of different agencies or countries where companies have kind of agreed not to sell data. And some of this comes from government regulations. There's also, at least at Planet, we have an internal ethics board, for example. And if we think that somebody is trying to do something uncouth with the data, we can either shut off the pipeline to them, or we can decide to not sell them data in the first place. But you do also still have public imagery that's coming down from satellites operated by NASA and the European Space Agency, Japan, places like that. And that data is free and open for anybody to access, but it's much lower resolution. So it's not, doesn't have as many applications for potential bad actors to use compared to something like high resolution imagery.
Tanya, I mean, sorry, I want to keep you for a moment because you have a very interesting, you have a distinct perspective given where you're coming from, as opposed to a lot of the players who are coming from the public sector. Is that, do you think the current institution, when you describe the potential collision that took place, and we've heard statements from people who are focused on China, but actually everyone's doing it and saying the same thing, it's a first come, first served basis. Space to a certain extent. People are saying, politicians and private sector are saying, well, it shouldn't be a common good. Others, the United States has said this, and so does China, that should be no concept. It's limitless, and there should be no sense of common good. From your perspective, given, and we've got, as I was referring to earlier, we've got more junk in outer space than we've got operable satellites. At the moment, most of them are about communication, but very quickly they'll turn into defense and military use in various ways. Do you feel that current international institutions and current regulations, as I said, the Outer Space Treaty or the Liability Treaty that are from the 70s, are still up to it?
No, a lot of these are non-binding treaties, so it's mostly people just saying, "Oh, we say we'll abide by this," but there's not anything necessarily holding them to that. And the world has changed significantly since the time the Outer Space Treaty came out, and so it's certainly time to revisit that and start looking at, what is the reality of space right now, and where is it going to be going in the future. I think you're totally right. We cannot avoid militarization of space, as much as scientists like me would love to think that it's this pure, limitless place that is completely for research and exploration. That's not realistic. It won't stay that way as more countries expand into space, as more countries have the ability to put up the equivalent of spy satellites, or they're worried about things like anti-satellite missiles. These are all going to be issues that we're going to have to create some kind of regulations to deal with, and we can't just ignore it because it's going to happen more quickly than we expect.
And it's that thing, isn't it, about learning from the past? And it's almost as if like we think it's mañana, it won't happen, or actually it's not, we're not there yet. And we make that same old mistake, don't we? And we act too late, as we have done in the pandemic. But my sense is that what might happen up there could be catastrophic if we don't, as we heard over the few days, if we don't act quickly. Can I urge you, those of you who are interested in this kind of topic in particular, or have a vantage, but I know Euromil are here and others, I'd really welcome you to engage and tell us what you think. Tell us what you think should happen. Whilst we're in the sconce in the middle of an economic and virus crisis, and you think, actually, this is too far away, this is kind of urgent, immediate, and need for us to kind of think about right now from a peace, security, defence perspective. So I would really like your thoughts and views, so don't hesitate to put your hand up. I want to turn to a UK perspective. I'm very pleased to have Graham Turnock here, Chief Exec of the UK Space Agency with us. Graham, thank you for joining us. You just need to unmute yourself.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Very good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I'm not going to do the classic Brexit thing that everyone wants to talk about. I think we're really interested. You're a member of the European Space Agency. You are an active participant in this. Since your tenure, Graham, you've kind of looked at more strategic cooperation, both, and making it a more of a strategic political issue within the UK. You've heard from the politician and you've heard from the planetary scientist. I'd be really interested from your perspective. Let's not think about whether you're part of the EU band or not, but you are part of the European Space Agency and the Council and a group of people who are leading this agenda. So what's your perspective on space as a common good? And I believe your internet's not as kind of, ironically, as effective at this stage, but let's see if you speak, we'll get a better sense.
Thanks, Amanda. Indeed, let's see how it goes. I live in central London, but even here, the internet is not always perfect. So first of all, clearly space is a massively important domain for us, both in terms of security, development, and economic reasons. The European Commission recently estimated that approximately 10% of Europe's economy was dependent on space, and that disruption to space services could cost Europe 50 billion euros annually in GVA. We carried out a study here looking at the impact on the UK economy if we lost access to GPS services, and concluded that a 5-day outage would cost us almost £2 billion. So space is massively important, first of all, to our economies. And then secondly, the threat to our use of space is increasing. So you've mentioned space debris. Space debris is unfortunately a fact of life, and it risks being a growing problem. There are something like 30,000 pieces of debris greater than 10 centimeters in orbit around the Earth.
Wow.
And that number risks increasing if we don't do something about it. We're putting up more and more satellites. There were something like 1,000 active satellites in orbit in 2010. That increased to 2,000 this year, and estimates are that we'll get to between 3,000 and 4,000 in just another 4 years' time.
That's right.
We were just talking about collision avoidance. Tanya's comment about the near miss between European Union, European Space Agency satellite, and SpaceX. The more satellites that are up there, the more collision warnings we're going to have. And at the moment, those collision warnings are really quite rough and ready. There's already a huge number to sift through and decide which are the ones that we should respond to. So, for example, the Iridium Cosmos collision that happened quite a long time ago was not even anticipated to be the most worrying potential collision during the week in which it happened. So we have to get a lot technically better at understanding, mitigating, and responding to the threat of debris. In some ways, also, it's an opportunity. Debris is one of the most obvious manifestation of the sense in which we are interdependent on one another in space. And it's a clear area where we do need to act collectively and in concert. And if we can do something there, then we can build confidence in acting appropriately and collectively in other areas.
But
so
Graham,
we are focusing very much on practical measures, technology-driven measures. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. No, thank you, but sorry to interrupt you. So on that note, what's your sense of your peers, your peer group in Europe, in really thinking about this? Because, you know, as a non-expert and as an observer on this, it feels like, you know, we thought we'd never have a pandemic. It felt like Netflix, and we're now living it. And with the capacities out there for bad actors, you could have whole cities shut down within hours, potentially. There's a potential there for that to happen. And all sorts of bad stuff. Is there a sense of urgency amongst your fellow peers to say, let's get our act together?
Yeah, I think there is a sense of urgency, and there have been some really positive moves really quite recently. So we had the ratification of the long-term sustainability guidelines within the context of the UN only last year. Now that took quite a long time to produce. As Tanya says, it's still a sort of voluntary arrangement, but it definitely reflected a sense that we need to move things forward. And certainly at the European level, in terms of ESA, there's a very promising new program called the ESA Space Safety Program, which got a lot of support last December at the triennial funding round to do things like trial debris removal. So there's a European Space Agency project which aims to take a piece of debris out of space. We're looking at things like automated collision avoidance. I think there really is a sense of urgency here, and ESA very much is leading that response. And at the European level, Commissioner Breton made a very big point about space traffic management in his first big speech earlier this year. So I sense a real acceleration here.
Graham, what would be helpful to know, and I'm actually, thankfully, we have, obviously, you're a member of ESA, and so is our next speaker, who's the chair of the council, but it would be, and I'll bring someone in from them to answer some of these issues. But from your perspective, the same question I've asked Tanya, do you have a sense that the current multilateral institutional framework that we have is up to the job for dealing with space and its implications in terms of military and other uses?
I think we have to accept that we will not progress quickly enough if it's done through a unanimous revision of treaties. That is a very slow process. But those treaties, I think, can provide a useful framework to encourage then a sort of proactive, beta-style approach to developing best practice by leading nations, which then encourage others to adopt without having to go through a very cumbersome ratification process.
Sounds good. It'll be good to know, Graham, if in your strategic plan for the next 3 years, whether you're thinking of saying, actually, guys, girls, let's get together and have more of a proactive framework and template for a treaty that's binding, but that's actually forward-looking and proactive, rather than, as you quite rightly say, Graham, if we go through a process of treaty revisal, we'll be here to, till forever. But thank you for your contribution. Please do stay on, and I may come back to you. I want to bring in some of our participants now who've kind of livened up, thankfully. Thank you very much. I want to bring in Jerome. Jerome, begin on. You are from the European Space Agency, a friend of the house, and good to see you online. Jerome, welcome. You're on mute.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Yes. So my question would be exactly about that. So it seems to me there are different opinions in Europe about updating those space treaties. So my first question would be, how do we get a kind of European consensus, and into which forum do we fight for this update of treaty?
Thank you. But also, Jerome, before you go, and perhaps I think Anna can answer this, but in the conversation regarding traffic management and all the rest of it, are these things that you are actively working on as an agency?
Oh yes, well I think Mr. Graham Turcott explained that, and I can only echo what he said.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very important topic for us. We're working on it. We have programs on it, but also the Commission is looking at this, and many member states are also looking at that. So, but from a technical point of view, we try to be prepared on that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll come back to your question, both with Anna, but also the wider audience. I'm not sure, I can't read from my screen whether we've got people from the European Commission. It's a pity that they're not on the panel, but we did try, but they weren't able to be here with us. But if there's anybody there lurking in the Zoom audience from a Commission perspective, don't hesitate to put your hand up and I'll bring you in. We have a question from our Twitter or our live stream audience from based on posted through Twitter. Crystal, hello.
Hey, hi, Damager. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. Welcome.
All right. So thank you. So the question from our Twitter today is collaboration between China, the US, and Russia a viable solution in the foreseeable future?
So we just repeat that. Is the escalation viable, or what's the question again?
Is collaboration between China, the US, and Russia a viable solution in the foreseeable future?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And perhaps our Zoom audience might have a response to that question. And not just one of you, but because none of our panelists on their own can answer that question directly. Thank you for that, Crystal. We will turn to that. Rudy Prem?
Thank you. You hear me?
We can indeed. Please do introduce yourself and say what your question or query is, please.
Yes, my name is Rudy Priem, and I'm working for Raytheon Technologies, so an aerospace and defense company, but I'm also the chairman of the NATO Industrial Advisory Group. So at NATO, of course, we also look at space. But I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to promote from a NATO Industrial Advisory Group, also looking at space. Companies on both sides should stick together and work together. And we feel that there are some trends on both sides of the Atlantic of strategic autonomy. It's not only on the European side, also on the US side, where there might be some policies coming up, again, going through stovepiping and things like that. So we keep saying, but also for companies, there are a lot of space companies, European ones based in the US. We have the same US companies, space companies based in Europe, or trying to work together with companies, where now people start saying, well, should we work together? So it's not only like the lady said with China and Russia, especially in this case with Canada, for example, and with the US. So I'm just like promoting it to make sure that we are not going to protectionist trends again, and that companies together, and a lot of companies work together, but there might be policies in place in the future that make it difficult. And we have some trends now, even in Europe, where certain US-based or Canadian-based companies in Europe don't get access to, for example, conferences, space conferences, or whatever. Just the fact that they're based on the other side of the Atlantic. So I'm promoting for both sides. Let's just stick together, strong together, and set, like you said in the beginning, set standards together.
Rudy,
so stronger.
Yes, Rudy, thank you. Thank you so much. Don't go yet, which is, I think, is great. I'm so glad you made that point, and it's really good to get that perspective, especially from a NATO industry point of view. I mean, I was going to ask you what the mood music is, and I think you set that out quite clearly. There's a trend here that of non-collaboration and a sense of competition. From the NATO perspective, do you think what you're sitting in the middle of is effectively constructed to do the job you need to do? I know that's a really difficult question for you, Rudy, but I keep on thinking that we continue to repeat and revive current structures, even though the future and horizon suggests that we actually need a new model for doing things, potentially here. Where you're sitting with this group of industrialists, etc., do you feel you've got the right structure and mechanism to do what you need to do from a NATO perspective?
Well, I think what we can promote at NATO level, and that's mainly true what they call the Conference of National Armaments Directors. So it's the CNAT, it exists more than 50 or 60 years. It's looking in what they call capability development, and space also becomes an area to have multinational cooperation. So all these national armaments directors, individuals from the different nations, including partner nations, are sitting together and looking at opportunities for multinational cooperation. And it is growing. So like many people say, not one nation can do it alone. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing is that at the national Ministry of Defense level or government level, they look for multinational cooperation. There are a lot of initiatives. If you Google the NATO website, you're going to find a lot of examples, and space will be an example as well. But then you have the industrial, let's say, layer. And at industry level, like I said, people find partners on both sides of the Atlantic in the NATO community. And then we find sometimes that if you have a consortium that you work together, sometimes then above you, certain regulations are coming out that make it necessary to split up again, where certain people say, oh, but now I cannot cooperate with you because there's this kind of policy or export policy or any other policy. So sometimes you have this ecosystem that works good, and then you have this policy level that grows above it. So that's why we try also at within the NATO Industrial Advisory Group to advise nations, because also NATO, they don't work on policies in this domain, but they can be the winner of the nations and then try to tell them what the barriers might be to, and that's important, multinational cooperation within NATO at military level, but especially at industry level to develop the capabilities, because we need, like people said, all the space capabilities come from industry, indeed. So we have to stick together and work together on the development of future space capabilities.
Rudy, thank you very much. That's been really helpful. And those who've been long in the tooth in the system, in the EU bubble system, will find your comments very familiar. But let's hope we've learned lessons and we're moving forward in a different manner. I want to bring in our last contributor, and sorry, I'm going to put a lot of weight on your shoulders, Anna, because there's a lot there that you've heard. Now, I'm deliberately bringing you in at this stage because not only do you sit in that position as being the top end of the the space agency in Sweden, but also the fact that you are the chair of the Council of the European Space Agency, and so there's a kind of a double issue here. So what I wanted to hear from you is about the importance of, and it's a driver for collaboration, is using infrastructure in space in a way that we need to, and the fact that it's safeguarded. That will be useful to start off with, because I think then you can perhaps build on some of what you've heard about the need for collaboration. We've heard from, as the chair of the council, who are you going to politically in the Commission to make sure that some of this, which we know is important to take on board, is listening and making sure they're taking account of it. And a very warm welcome to you. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me here. And if we talk about the infrastructure, we've talked about it a lot, and I think we're, like me, working for getting an infrastructure in space that we can really use for the benefit of mankind and benefit of the society. And now when it's in place, everyone discover it and say, oh, this is good, we can use it for different purposes, mostly good. And that's very, I really like that, of course. But we have to also ensure that not all different interests, when you have any interest, if you have an infrastructure like a road or something, you can use it for everything. This is the same with the space. But we have to really ensure that the infrastructure we have in space built up and will build up even more is really used in a very good way for the benefit of mankind. And as we also talked about, to destroy something in space is really destroying for everyone. If you have a war or something, you go to a country maybe and destroy things there. But here is something that we have all in common. And I know there's a lot of discussions to really get the regulations in place and things like that. But we have to do more. But it also, if we don't do it together, we will not react until it's too late, that you said before, until we have this very big accident of collision in space and at a high level. And then we'll have problem for a long, long time. So therefore, I think we should really protect it and not make it to something very specific. We have to use it as it should be used.
And in terms of where we go politically on trying to create some form of collaborative effort, regulatory, standard-setting approach, who in the Commission do you think the focus, where should the focus be?
I think it's not only on the Commission. I think it's on I think we should take a step back and look for Europe. Certainly, this Commission is very important here, but there is, as Graham told you before, I think UN is here working a lot with this. They have these COPUS regulations that everyone is applying to or should follow, and I think that's okay because I think this should be on the world level, universe level, and I think it's forces, but I don't. They think that everyone else should solve this problem. It's not our problem. Everyone else should solve it, and that's a key thing. It's like the environmental problems that we have right now in Earth. And so
you have there's the European Space Agency, which is a collaborative, if you like, of member states. People are involved in it in various ways. And we heard what the minister said about the decision making sometimes in the bureaucracy, and that it can be lopsided depending on the louder voice across the board. And then you've got the European Union with its statutory mandate in various ways, in terms of rule setting is one of them, standard setting is one of those, and ensuring common good. How do you, I mean, what's the kind of, if you look ahead and you've listened to what people have said, how do we find that fine balance between what you do and what the EU does? Surely it should be in harmony. I know it sounds ridiculous statement to make, but an obvious statement, but we know that it's never as such. What's your response to that, and what should we be doing?
I think it's really important that EU and ESA find their respective roles in a very good way. Okay. So we really cooperate and respect each other, because now it's EU is growing within space. ESA have its really long knowledge within technology and be very, very successful during all these years. So to find a common ground to work together, and I think that's essential. And that's the reason is that I've heard from NASA, from other organizations, they say, what are you doing in Europe? Why are you fighting between ESA and EU? Why don't you go together and really do something strong that is very important for Europe? And so that's actually my perspective. Let's find our roles and do something very good together, because we have the knowledge and the competences, and also I think the funding for most of it.
And is it so disappointing, Anna, because when we first embarked on this journey with European Space Agency a year ago, it struck me that, you know, Copernicus and the satellite infrastructure is the jewel in the crown of the future of the EU. It can be a world global leader. It has the greatest capacity. It has data that's used more by NASA free of charge than anybody else in the EU. Yet most of our needs are met outside of the EU. We know we need to invest in big tech and big computers, but this is like, it's like go figure, an obvious moment of, this is, if you do this right, my goodness, so much else of our economy and climate change and other factors would work so effectively, and we would be a global player. What is it that needs to shift here? Is it simply the politics of the Commission, or is it politics of ESA? What is it that needs to change here? What if you can in this fora, share with us, what's stopping the obvious from happening?
I think it takes more time than expected, and it's not the bureaucracy, things like that, because when you take down data, you have to know how to use it, how to use the science part, like Tanya was talking about. You have to deal with it, and now we have a lot of initiatives, both around the world, but also in Europe and in Sweden, how to take care about all these different data, because you combine space data with other kind of data, and then you get a very interesting results, but you have to know how to do it. You're not just take down the data and then you have all the results. And we shouldn't underestimate the time that takes, or the money it needed to develop that.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a lot of different things. It's also sometimes you are guarding their positions and say, you shouldn't do that, or we should do that, instead really doing things. And therefore also I agree with Rudy in general that we should all cooperate much more, because I think we need that in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, it reminds me of the kind of that sense of faux sovereignty about data sharing. We've known historically member states guard fiercely their sense of data and say, well, no, this is ours. And yet they've learned that to their detriment and to the failure for citizens, actually, when we think about health pandemic, that there is no such thing. You need to create a framework of data sharing that actually will harness for good and accelerate what you have as a crown jewel in Europe. But let's see. It feels like I get a sense that we might have to organize a separate seminar just on the discussion of this particular issue and perhaps knock heads together. And not that we're arrogant in that way, but perhaps having an open forum to think about how does Europe get its act together, both politically, but with the scientists, but also with the capability of what you as ESA do as a way forward. So perhaps something for us to think about. I want to thank you very much, Anna. It's been really helpful and very useful to have you on. Our colleagues from Euromil still there? I really am quite keen to bring you in. Don't be shy. I can see you actually. Would you perhaps engage? And can I put you on the spot? Tell me, from your perspective, what are you thinking about when you're listening to what you have been in this past 40 minutes, from your perspective at Euromil?
Yeah.
Please do introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Emmanuel Jacob. I'm the president of Euromil. And Euromil is an organization of military associations and military trade unions. So you will not be surprised that I will try to bring in the human resources aspect in the whole discussion. Of course. And I think I really want to join what Rudy Prim says, and also what Anna said before. But from a third perspective, the human resources part. We are all creating on national level space commands, cyber commands. And for example, when we look to the US, I think that Cyber Command has been created in 2010 or something. Still today, they are having quite some trouble bringing in competent people and having enough people to work on that level. So this is an enormous competition. But this means also if we don't bring our resources together on the European level, that we will have on a very short time an enormous problem on having competent people working. There is an enormous competition between private sector, public sector. We need people in armed forces. So there is a lot of coordination and a lot of collaboration on the European level, as Anna just explained, in this field. But really bringing at the end the resources together, this is still something that is missing. We are always coming back to the member states. In the member states, there is already this competition between different sectors. There is industry that has to play a role. So where we are a little bit afraid of is that at the end, we will simply not manage in the field of human resources to bring all these people together if we continue to work each for our own goals and not bring this in reality all under one umbrella.
Isn't it so frustrating? It's the same rhythm and rhyme that we hear that, on any area of the past 30, 40 years in relation to the EU, we think, let's change our mantra and our rhythm. What is it from a Euromil perspective, if I can kind of press you for a little bit more time, are you putting up documentation, paperwork, kind of a view from Euromil to both European space agencies, but more so to the European Commission to say, we need to get our act together in terms of skill shortages. This is the opportunity for us to lead and take it forward. Have you been able to do that yet, or are you planning to do that?
We are surely not planning to do that. But what we plan to do is that we want to collaborate, of course, with the Commission if the Commission would set up something. Euromil as such, and I need to be honest in that, Euromil as such is too small to bring up ourselves these kind of recommendations and plans. But of course, we have our network. We have a network of our 33 associations in 22 European countries. And to open this discussion, we need collaboration with, in this case, the Commission, but also on the national level. And this is still something problematic, because then we come back to the same discussion we already had before, that every nation tries first to deal with things on their national level. Absolutely. And surely not bring in third parties in that discussion. But we monitor from very close, and wherever we have the possibility to work in this field, we will continue to work in this.
Okay, thank you for responding and coming into us. And I don't think you're too small. Actually, I think you could be very influential from the point of view of what you represent and what you do. And so when we do plan this next let's say, policy discussion next year, we'll be sure to bring you in, because actually the human resource element of this is absolutely key and critical in terms of transition planning. And if we learn from the past, I want to bring Graham back in before I have to touch down to close this very interesting discussion that we've had so far. Graham.
Yes, thanks, Simon. And in fact, I was just making a comment in the chat bar. I wasn't sure if I could stay for the end, but I just wanted to pick up on the point about data sharing, because it is absolutely essential, certainly when we come to trying to manage the problem of debris and collision avoidance. And one of the biggest challenges is really understanding what's going up there, where objects are and the risks that they pose one another. And especially as we think about military and civil uses of space, I think we have to be very careful about not over-classifying data, which could limit our willingness to share that data and more effectively manage space. And I think that's one thing the European Union obviously needs to think about very carefully. It's created this new DG, DFIST, so that it can look at both defence and space. I think it's important that the defence and security concerns don't win out too much in that debate, though it is a slightly controversial view, just to leave you with that.
Graham, that's good. I mean, your internet is so poor, despite it being central London, I have to say. So you might have to scribble on the Zoom chat. If I get it, what you're saying is, let's not get caught by a set of agenda on the military defence side to actually overcomplicate the classification of data. Let's try and keep it as simple as possible so we're able to cross-fertilise and use it across different countries, if I've understood you correctly.
Exactly.
Ah, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'm sorry about the connectivity.
No, it's really bad. I'm really quite shocked. Yeah, surprised. So, but apologies for that. But if you have ideas, and if you have an, from the UK Space Agency developing some of this, do put it on the Zoom chat. I want to bring in one of our senior fellows, Jamie Shea, who's been steeped in UN matters and NATO matters for many, many years. You've been listening, but you've also been part of this. You've been facilitating and moderating this discussion over the past 2 days. Jamie, your thoughts?
Dharmendra, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come in, and thanks to you for moderating a really interesting session. I've been taking voluminous notes. I don't really have so much a comment or a perspective, Dharmendra, but I did have a few questions. If you would, briefly, I'd like to come back to Crystal's question from the Twitter feed, which I think is important, which is, what are the prospects for engaging big players like India, China, and Russia in the cooperative management of space? I think, as was pointed out, when these countries are in the media regarding space, it's often because of anti-satellite tests or accusations regarding the militarization of space. But as the US, the new administration, and the European Union try to sort of reset their relations, particularly with China, is space an area where there is a chance of some cooperative work? Or are we going to come up against the buffers, as we've done in the cyber domain, of different interpretations of the internet and space and sovereignty and all of these issues? So what chance for this sort of truly cooperative approach among the global actors? The second thing, if I may, very briefly, was that, given, as was pointed out, that industry is now so much more in the driving seat, to what degree can industry get together to work out its own proposals on a code of conduct for the cooperative management? Remember, Microsoft a couple of years back took the lead on cyber by proposing a digital Geneva Convention. So, or is industry really leaving this more to a government to sort out? And then finally, just a practical question, if I may, Dharmendra, and I promise I'll stop speaking, which is, I saw the other day that the ESA has launched a Sentinel-6 satellite called Michael Freilich, named after an ESA pioneer, together with the United States, to enhance our ability to do climate monitoring. I'd really be interested in learning a little bit more about this and to how it can effectively contribute to better means of identifying the impact of global climate change. Strikes me that would be a fantastic service to the world community that the US and ESA working together could offer. So thanks for giving me the floor.
Jamie, thank you. Thank you very much. On that last point, it was the subject of one of our debates on Monday, actually. It was where we had a partnership debate with the European Space Agency, specifically on the notion of a digital twin Earth. And they'd launched their satellite on Saturday, which was very successful. And, the the possibilities and the potential and the capabilities that this infrastructure provides are limitless and fascinating, and can really help us with applying that thing that we always complain about, Jamie and others, is about the absence of foresight in policy planning and policy decision making and evidence-based policy making. Because what we have within Europe and the world now actually is a fantastic capacity to look at what's happening to crops, what's happening to disease, what's happening to people in certain areas. We're able to think about rising sea levels. We're able to predict where there might be a storm and what you do around that. Whole range of capacities that can transform how we manage, respond, and cope with the future crises that are probably ahead of us. I need to conclude, but I want to bring back in the last couple of minutes both Anna and Tanya. Anna, can I just bring you back very briefly, if you want to be able to say anything in terms of what you see now on the horizon as a key issue in the next 12 months or so on this agenda. Anna, over to you.
I think it's, as I said before, I think it's extremely important now that we in the next phase, both for ESA and for EU, that we find very good collaboration climate, and I think we will do that. But it is extremely important. And then I really also very happy about the satellite that is up now. But I think this development should not go too slowly. And I also know that I also really emphasize that the collaboration between ESA as a big entity, but also the support to the small companies, because we really need that. The industrial level is extremely important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tanya, can I bring
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. What do you, given you've listened to the debate and you are, you're an entrepreneur, you've done some amazing things. You've listened to this debate. What do you want? What do you want to see happen in the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months?
I would echo Anna's sentiments in terms of collaboration. I think government and industry really need to work together to figure out what are the regulations that are missing. There are sectors in industry that are crying out for regulation because they don't want to go too far down one path and then suddenly be cut off when regulations change. And so we're not at the beginning in a lot of these things, but we're early enough that we can start to influence the way that stuff changes and progresses as we move toward more activity from the commercial sector and government together in space.
Excellent, Tanya. Thank you very much. And I'm minded by that point, Gren, that you made from the UK Space Agency. That actually, let's not revise treaties. Let's create a framework for the future, learning from some of those treaties, what their deficiencies, some of the strengths, but actually let's not go into revisionism mode, but actually create a proactive, future-focused approach to our regulation and treaty basis on this particular agenda, because, my goodness, we need to get it right. Colleagues, it's been a real pleasure. I do need to conclude. I'm minded by what Jamie, my colleague, said when he first started on this summit, that in NATO and others they've talked about there are three things that need to happen, which is capabilities, capabilities, capabilities. I don't come from that background, but what it occurs to me from this debate is there are three things, which are collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. We really need that effort and that structure in place. My goodness, if there was one area in the future, it has to be this. And as I mentioned on Monday at our Digital Twin Earth event, we are, at Friends of Europe, developing a space program that's been in genesis in the last 12 months, in fact, with European Space Agency and other players. But what we want to do is go full tilt and announce from next year a program on space that deals with some of these issues, about being able to knock heads together, be thinking about regulation, standard setting, how do you involve the private sector, but how does collaboration work more effectively? But more importantly, how does space become a force for good and the social progress and humanity, rather than what we've seen in big techs has been a force for bad and perhaps not for social purpose and social good as it should have been. And now we are basically rewiring the system with big techs to make it happen. Colleagues, thank you very much for joining me and us over this past 3 days. It's been a roller coaster. We've covered a number of issues which will be recorded and played back in a form of both visual but also document of sorts, so we don't lose sight of some of the ideas that have come out of this, so that we can plug them in our future peace, security, defence area of expertise in 2021. Look at our website for forthcoming debates and issues that we'll be covering. And I want to first thank our contributors, but also, most importantly, those of you who've come on Zoom and live stream. Without you, this wouldn't actually work and be meaningful. So I want to thank you a lot for being committed, engaging, and posting your questions. We look forward to engaging with you again. Thank you all very much. Stay tuned to our website, and all I can say is mind your distance and stay safe. Thank you very much, and see you again. Bye-bye.